Hi, I'm Neil. You're not. And we are talking about the article Forgiven by Paul Tullis. I hope you've read the article at this point. I know that that I haven't allowed that much time for it. But I hope you've read it. I hope you've started to think about the questions and how you'll respond to them. Um, one of the points that I'll revisit from episode one. This is, by the way, episode two of Forgiven. In episode one, I was mentioning that, and it's important to keep this in front of us, that if this article was just about murder, uh, there's nothing special or unique about that in our country. What makes this article unique is that it's about forgiveness, and we are trying to understand. Uh, we're trying to understand how the Gromers forgive Connor, the murderer of their daughter Anne. It's quite challenging, and it brings up many emotions, and so in us. So so I think the article really comes down to what I've identified as questions three and four on your exercises. And I'm going to read them and talk about them. So, question three, I ask you to discuss this passage, and that goes Connor puts Anne's mother, Kate, on the list of people who can visit him in jail. Kate says, I knew that if I defined Connor by that one moment as a murderer, I was defining my daughter as a murder victim, and I could not allow that to happen. Leaving to visit Connor in jail for the first time since the murder, Kate asked her husband, Andy, if he had a message for Connor. Andy says, tell him I love him and I forgive him. Kate says, I wanted to be able to give him the same message. Connor owed us a debt he could never repay, and releasing him from that debt would release us from expecting that anything in this world could satisfy us. So let's look at this comment. I think this is just an extraordinary comment in the middle of an extraordinary article, um, and tremendously profound comment with lots of ramifications. So that first part of the Kate's comment, I knew that if I defined Connor by that one moment as a murderer, I was defining my daughter as a murder victim, and I could not allow that to happen. One of the things that we understand at some level is that being a victim is bad. We, I mean, and it's kind of weird how this works, but we think of victims, or we should think of victims as innocent. They're the ones who had a crime or an act committed against them, and so they are, by definition, innocent, and yet no one wants to be a victim. In other words, I mean, which might seem obvious at some level, but no one wants to be a victim for the other associations of victimhood. I mean, it's an interesting term, victimhood. You become a victim, and that is what your life is. That's how your life is characterized. He or she was a victim of, and that family, their one of their son was killed in the 9/11 attack, and that becomes the dominant thought of the dominant way that people think of you, and your relative as a victim. And so what Kate is saying is that she wants to separate her daughter from this association of victimhood, and being a victim has bad associations with it, just as in terms of being a victim. So a victim is someone who is victimized is weak. They are defeated. They've failed. They're powerless. They're negligent. They're helpless. They're passive. And with all of that, they're complicit. They've participated in the crime by not doing enough or anything to prevent a crime from happening to them, as though the victim had power and didn't use it. And one of the terrible notions of being a victim is this idea of having participated in the crime against yourself, that follows from powerlessness or not doing enough and failure. And so what Kate is trying to separate herself from is this idea that her daughter was somehow weak or a failure or complicit in her own crime, in her own victimization. And I should mention also another association with being a victim is it's pitiful, it's pathetic. I mean, if you think about that, this is these are terrible associations with this idea. No one, independently of being a victim, wants to be thought of as passive or weak or a failure. And yet there's this event that characterizes people this way. So Kate wants to separate somehow her daughter from being a victim with all these associations of passivity and failure. And one of the other, moving to another point, one of the other points is that Kate wants to be able to think of her daughter without thinking of her daughter's life summed up in that one moment. It's tremendously sad, I think, and difficult that we think of human beings who have had one horrifying moment. And in a certain sense, I want to say one horrifying moment of being a victim, but also one horrifying moment of being a perpetrator of a crime. That becomes their entire life. It's how people react to them. And so what Kate is trying to do is to distance her daughter from, or prevent her daughter from being summed up, from having her whole, 18 or 19 years of Anne's life summed up in one event. Oh, yes, Anne was killed by so-and-so, and her life is now a murder victim. And so what Kate is trying to say is that Anne's life is much richer than that one horrible moment, but that one moment. There is much more to Anne than just that. And so what Kate has to do, and I'm not saying this is conscious, but that she goes through this. I suspect that she didn't, but she understands. She intuits at some profound moral and psychological level that this is what has to be done. So what Kate has to do is to remove her daughter from being collapsed into that one horrible moment. And in fact, Kate says this pretty much on page 9. It is right around, I think it's preceding the quote of number 4, of question number 4. And Kate says, the author of the article says, the Gromers, and this is on page 9, the Gromers said they didn't forgive Connor for his own sake, but for their own. Everything I feel, I can feel because we forgave Connor, Kate said. Because we could forgive. People can say her name, can say Anne's name. People can think about my daughter, and they don't have to think, oh, the murdered girl. This is just what we're thinking here. I mean, her whole life, Anne's being collapsed into that one moment. I think that when people can't forgive, they're stuck. All they can feel is the emotion surrounding that moment. I can be sad, but I don't have to stay stuck in that moment where this awful thing happened. Because if I do, I may never come out of it. Forgiveness for me was self-preservation. And so the idea here is that Kate and Andy's life and everybody affected by them, by that murder, they're all sucked into that moment. And what Kate is saying is we have to be able to live our life. We need to feel sadness. We need to feel the life of our daughter and not just her terrible end. And this idea um, that Kate forgives Connor is to remove this notion that Kate that Anne was merely a victim with all these bad associations on this. Again, my notes are on the side, and I want to make sure I get all of this from here. So this is a major idea of what is going on with Kate's and Andy's forgiveness of Connor. Um, so so this so the other part of that, the next point that I want to make is that in order for Kate and Andy to forgive to free Anne up from being a victim, they have to forgive Connor. They have to look at Connor's life as a whole. They can't collapse his life into just being a murderer. He was much more than that. And they have to recognize his life also, or they can't recognize Anne's life as a whole. And so this idea of separation, of separating Anne from that event, means that they must separate Connor from that event. It's a tremendously profound idea that they would have to do that. They have to remove Connor also from his characterization merely or solely as a murderer. One of the recognitions of Kate and Andy here is that their lives are never going to be free of this event. They will never, ever. I mean, they can't. They can't empty their lives. They can't empty their lives of this event. It will always be there, and this is what they have to do in order to move along from this event, from this horrible event, knowing that they also have lives, and that the only way to remember to remember Anne, is to also remember Connor as he was. They have to forgive Connor. It doesn't happen. You can't remove Kate without removing. I'm sorry. You can't remove Anne. You can't separate Anne from this event without also separating Connor from this event. And so they have to look at Connor as a whole human being in order to look at their daughter, Anne, as a whole human being, premised on the idea that they will never empty their lives out from this event. So they have to not deny the event, not try to avoid the event, but to take that event into, and I'm sorry to talk in this way, but they have to take it into the organic structure of their lives. Their lives will be different from now on, whatever they do. And the way that they figure at some level, at some wonderful, profound, intuitive level, the way that they figure that is that they have to take Connor's life also into this picture and respond to him as a human being. So this is a tremendously complicated and full idea, I think, here. I'm going to read that part and then move on to the second part of number 3. Connor puts Anne's mother, Kate, on the list of people who can visit him in jail. Kate says, I knew that if I defined Connor by that one moment as a murderer, I was defining my daughter as a murder victim, and I could not allow that to happen. So that's one aspect with many meanings, many ramifications. The second part of that statement is leaving to visit Connor in jail for the first time since the murder, since Connor had put Kate on the list of who could visit him in jail. Think of that. The mother of the young woman that he killed, he puts on the list of who can visit him in jail. He doesn't do it to jerk around with Kate. He does it because he has this deep relationship with Kate and with Andy. He's quote unquote part of their family in not quite a literal sense, but almost. Remember, how do you forgive a child of yours if that child of yours has killed another child of yours? That's the context of what they're doing, and Connor knows this also. Um, so, leaving to visit Connor in jail for the first time since the murder, Kate asked her husband, Andy, if he had a message for Connor. Andy says, tell him I love him and forgive him. Kate says, I wanted to be able to give him the same message. Connor owed us a debt he could never repay, and releasing him from that debt would release us from expecting that anything in this world could satisfy us. This is a tremendously profound statement. I think it's remarkable in its depth of understanding, and that is that we think of crimes as, I mean, one of the ways that we think of crimes is as incurring a debt. If I take your I don't know, if I steal something from you, let's say a lamp, or I don't know, a ring or something like that, one of the ways that you make that crime of yours, that I make that crime of mine right, is that I pay you back for that ring. I mean, that is one of the things, that's one of the ways that we think of that. There are, in a certain sense, reparations, repayment of for the crime that I have incurred against you. And so we think of crimes as incurring a debt, the criminal as creating a debt towards those or with those who have been victimized. Sometimes the people who have been victimized are, or is, the community as a whole. And you see in legal trials where it's so and so versus the city of, or versus the community of, or something like that. Crimes injure a community, and the way that we think of this is that the criminal has to repay a debt. With material crimes, that's easy. It's not so easy when the crime, obviously, it's not so easy when the crime is an emotional crime, as this also is with the Grommaires. What Connor has done is commit a crime and incur a debt that it is not clear how that would or could or should be repaid. I mean, let me read that part again. Kate says, I wanted to be able to give him the same message of Andy the father. I wanted to give him forgive him. I wanted to give him the same message. Connor owed us a debt he could never repay. Think about that. What is the one thing? What is the one thing that would repay that debt? What would Connor have to do to give back to, or to repay, or to make right this debt that he has incurred against the Grommaire family? What could he do to repay that debt? What is it? And unfortunately, there's only probably one thing that could be done that would make that crime right. And that's, of course, the one thing that can't possibly be done, which is to return Anne to life, to give them Anne back in her full life. It's a debt, in other words, that can't be repaid. That's what Kate says. Connor owed us a debt he could never repay. Why couldn't he repay it? Because no one, and certainly not Connor, can bring could bring Anne to life again. But that's the only thing that would fully repay that. So that Connor it incurs this debt that it can't be undone, and it's the only thing that would rectify the universe for the Gromers. So what Kate then says is this other remarkable passage, I think, or notion. She says, Connor owed us a debt he could never repay, and releasing him from that debt would release us from expecting that anything in this world could satisfy us. Think of that idea. I'm sorry for reading this so much, but it's just so full. And releasing him from that debt would release us from expecting that anything in this world could satisfy us. What Kate and Andy understand, intuitively perhaps, but they understand, is that if they demand the repayment of a debt that can never be repaid, they are setting themselves up for a life that collapses into essentially this horrible event. That's what their lives become. I want to say that they negate their whole lives if they continue to demand the repayment of a debt that cannot be repaid, as this debt cannot be repaid. So what Kate and Andy Gromer do is they release Connor from a debt that he can't possibly repay. I mean, in some, I want to say, wonderful, and I hesitate to say it this way, but what they realize is that in some wonderful life-affirming way, they realize that they have to release Connor from this debt. All of their lives will, I keep using the word, I guess it's the word I want, will collapse into this event if they don't. Everyone, the whole families, they're gone. They're negated. So so I think that's just tremendously profound. Connor owed us a debt he could never repay, and releasing him from that debt would release us from expecting that anything in this world could satisfy us. What the Gromers recognize in this statement is not only on a personal level, but they're also recognizing this other profound idea about the world, as they say, that the world is not necessarily fair and just, that it's just not arranged that way. We want to think of justice as a balance between right and wrong, or as the innocent people will prevail, or innocence will prevail, and so on. But we find that, and they are saying this, that the world is not fair. It is not just. And to demand justice in this world is, you're setting yourself up for a permanent feeling of loss and beyond sadness. I want to say tragedy and frustration. Now, I do want to say that the Gromers are not giving up on this idea of justice. They're going at it another way. They're constructing almost a different kind of universe. But one aspect of this is realizing that the world is not fair or just. And in that, behind that, they recognize this other kind of, well, very interesting idea. If you make a calculation of justice and fairness, you will always come out on the losing side. It's just how it works. In a lifetime of living, um, we all get we all get wronged. We all get dents and harm, and we all get taken advantage of. Um, we all get hurt. And what this notion is, what the Grommaires are saying is, you can't calculate out the world. You can't do this. Well, they got so much and I only got this, or I got this and they got so much. If you do a calculation, you will never come out either with an even balance or with a winning balance. It just won't work. So you can't enter the calculation. It's interesting how much this speaks against something like Bentham's moral theory. There's so many units of pain and so many units of pleasure and so on and so forth. And crimes, we to punish them, we inflict so many units of pain on the criminal. And there's an ultimate calculation. There's no calculation. If you do the calculation, you're in trouble. And so the Grommaires realize that nothing will ever balance out the murder, the death of their daughter Anne. And so they give up the idea of life as a calculation. And I'm speaking in some level profoundly. I want to take this to a bit smaller level, and that is that I have a sister. She's 5 years older. We play this game of, we know what we're doing, so it's kind of just for fun. But we play this game of who called each other the last time. Did I call my sister the last time, or did she call me? So if I skip calling her back, and she lives in Cleveland, it's not like we live across the country, but we phone each other. So we play this game. Well, I didn't call you back because you hadn't called me back. You've got to call me back first. It's probably a bad example, but I just want to note that we do play this game of calculating outcomes in life, even in small experiences, much less profound experiences. So the point of this is, or one of the main points of this idea is that, and I want to leave you with that idea. We're going to go on to question 4, but the idea from number 3, and we've been talking about this for a while, is this last idea. Connor owed us a debt he could never repay, and releasing him from that debt would release us from expecting that anything in this world could satisfy us. And I hope you guys think about this. This is just such a tremendously profound idea, and also think about the idea that in order for the Grommaires to continue with their lives, not forget, forgiving is not forgetting, but to continue with their lives, they have to forgive Connor. They have to make his life whole in order to make their daughter Anne's life whole. And that means forgiving Connor's murder in order to think of Anne as something other than a victim, a murder victim, and in order to think of Connor as in this whole way, they have to release him from a debt that Connor can never repay, and that their lives, if they expect him or want him to repay that debt, their lives will be sucked into that event. Okay, that's question 3. I want to talk about question 4, which does have something to do with this also. I mean, this is all sort of a unity here, I suppose. Question number four. Question number four. Discuss what you think the following quote means. And this quote is on page 9, where the author starts and he says, "With and this is Connor speaking. With the Gromair's forgiveness, I could accept the responsibility and not be condemned." The author comments, "Forgiveness doesn't make him any less guilty, and it doesn't absolve him of what he did. But in refusing to become Connor's enemy, the Gromairs deprived him of a certain kind of refuge, of feeling abandoned and hated, and placed the reckoning for the crime squarely in his hands." Um, what's happening here is that the Gromairs are, I mean, the impact of their forgiving on Connor is not to excuse him, or not to I don't know, not cause him some sort of pain, or to free him, or to liberate him. It's not so that Connor can just go on as though nothing happened. Their forgiveness of Connor actually results in Connor being able to face up squarely to what he's done. It is the case with many criminals that they, when in the way they think about their crimes, or I should say their punishment, the way they think about their punishment is that it's somehow undeserved. That they say, I've had a difficult life. This happened to me. That happened to me. I was doing this. I was doing that. I wasn't thinking. There's all sorts of excuses, and there's a lot in this actually. But they think of themselves as being treated unfairly in a certain sense, and I want to say that in many instances, the lives of criminals their lives they are treated unfairly. I mean, to get back to this justice concern, it is true. But what forgiveness of Connor does, focusing on that, what forgiveness of Connor does is it removes this idea from Connor's head that he can somehow think that he's being treated unfairly. Oh, we were in the middle of an argument. It was her fault too. She pressed me on this. She wouldn't let go. I tried to do the right thing, and she was unhappy with this. I just forgot that, that she had done well on this exam. You can see how Connor would sort of wheedle out of responsibility for what he's done. But what the Gromairs do is not allow him to wheedle out of it, to avoid it. They in fact treat him so well that he can't blame the Gromairs. He can't blame the legal system. In fact, what it allows Connor to do, or the situation that it presents to Connor, is that it removes all those external barriers, those external possibilities of Connor throwing his guilt up against some wall and saying it's their fault, it's not my fault. It is his fault. And by the Gromairs forgiving him, he has to face squarely his responsibility. It put, as this notion says, it put the reckoning for the crime squarely in his hands. So it doesn't free him up. It doesn't liberate him from the crime. It frees him, or it prevents him, really, from being able to blame or remove the responsibility to somewhere else. It's his alone. It's quite a remarkable thing that again, that sometimes we face up to our responsibility when 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 those external conditions are um, are gone, are evaporated, and that's what the Gromers do. So so I think this is a very important part of what the Gromers do with Connor, is that they actually, I want to say, they force him to face up to the crime by removing the external conditions that would allow him to displace the responsibility. And so what happens, and this sort of goes into the fifth question here on this, and you can read that more for yourselves. It's already long, but what the idea here is that probably the best punishment, the most effective punishment, is when we punish ourselves. And I want to say that punishing ourselves is accepting our own guilt and um, and embracing that guilt into a life that allows us to somehow move on with the guilt, but with also a perhaps a changed notion of who we are, and so punishment is is real punishment. I think effective punishment is not by causing necessarily external pain on somebody. It's not beating them or imprisoning them or any of the ways, any of the numberless ways that we have of punishing people. It's by allowing the person, it's by creating a situation where the person is able to accept their guilt and their responsibility, and then by allowing that, putting them, the perpetrator, in the situation of essentially having to change profoundly. I think Connor will be changed if this works. Connor will be changed profoundly from kind of the bottom up, I think, as it were. And so it becomes his self punishment. It's not the prison that punishes him. It's his own acceptance of the guilt. I also want to go back. I am reminded of kind of a major point with question 3, and that is one. And I'm sorry for bouncing around and for this being so long. It will be longer, but one of the things that the Gromers do in forgiving Connor and dealing with the crime, the murder of their daughter, is this. I kind of hinted at this, but they don't run from the crime. You can't run from the crime. As I said, their lives will always be connected with the crime. You can't sever that crime from you. You can't cut it off. It's there. It's going to be there. Period. And in fact, I want to say, by running from the crime, by trying to deny it or some major portion of it, it just causes the wounds to go deeper. And so what the Gromers do, and this is in relation to question 3, what the Gromers do is they embrace the crime. I mean, they don't become the perpetrators, but they embrace Connor. They move toward him, not away from him. They can't run from him. That will do them no good. So they literally and metaphorically embrace Connor. They bring him into their lives so that he can be a whole person, and that his daughter can be, and so therefore his daughter, their daughter, can be a whole person. It's how you do that. You have to embrace. They have to embrace Connor, and I think this is really such an interesting idea. And I'm going to generalize on it, and you can do with this what you will, if you can make sense of it. And it is hard, a difficult idea, and I'm not sure I can make it clear enough. But we need to embrace our injuries. We can't outrun them. We can't sever them from ourselves. We have to embrace them and 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 allow them to do their organic work with us, as it were. And I think this is as true of broken relationships, which are very difficult to deal with in our lives. We have to go towards them. We can't run away from them, and we're not going to forget them necessarily. I believe we have to go towards them. We have to take them in, um, and so there's this idea, and I'm going to let you guys think about that. I think it's important to to think of those things. How do we embrace the crime, and how do we embrace the perpetrator of the crime? Because it's only that way, I think, that we really embrace our lives fully. This is 40 minutes long. I'm sorry it's so long, but I hope you'll think that this is interesting, or at least challenging, and thought provoking. Thanks.